All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. There's so much going on in the world right now that really demands our attention, and we're just so grateful that you've taken time out of your day to join us for this really important conversation. My name is Rachel DeCruz, and I work with the Upright Consulting team to support the Leading with Race and Climate Solutions project. Our project is really focused on equipping community leaders and local government practitioners with the information and resources necessary to continue leading with race in their climate work. And we work collaboratively with a really incredible project team that helps guide the direction and focus of our work, including Just Solutions, the Green Lining Institute, the Chisholm Legacy Project, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, and Facilitating Power. So we have dropped a link to our project website in the chat. We encourage folks to click on it, check out more about the project and our incredible partners. There's also some resources and tools on the website that folks can use. And you can sign up to receive regular updates from us at the bottom of that page. So I'm going to share just a few quick housekeeping notes before we jump in and get started. Like I already mentioned, we'd love for all of you to introduce yourselves in the chat. You can share your name, your organization, and where you're zooming in from so that we can get a sense of who's in virtual space with us here today. We are also going to have a Q&A section at the end of today's conversation, so encourage folks throughout the presentation to add your questions into the chat. We'll compile those and we're going to circle back to them later on in the agenda. I also just want to note, if you're someone who enjoys using the chat and you find it as a helpful way to engage with other folks in the session, to share what's standing out for you or what you're taking away from the speakers, very much encourage you to do that. I also recognize that some folks find the chat overwhelming. And so if you're one of those people, feel free to just stay focused on the presentation today. And all of you should know that after today's session, we'll be emailing folks the PowerPoint and any other materials that we reference on the call. So you'll have all of that kind of compiled and sent to you afterwards. All right. So this is our second webinar this year. We also held one in the spring that was really focused on clarifying the legal and political context we're operating in and elevating strategies and ideas for how we can continue to advance racial justice in climate work. And today's conversation is going to focus more on narrative. How do we talk about our work in a way that can galvanize support, that can bring more people into this fight, and that will increase our capacity to win? What we know is that the Trump administration is leading with fear and scarcity. Their story is really focused on dividing us, fostering hate, and dismantling our public institutions. And we have an opportunity in this moment to counter that story and to provide one that's rooted in our values and the kind of world that we want to build for ourselves and for future generations. And so that's really what initially drew us to the work of American Pride Rises. Their efforts are really focused on expanding our collective understanding of DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they're really focused on rooting us in the original ideas, concepts, and understanding of DEI before the term started being used to describe watered down, check the box approaches that large companies or institutions take so that they can pat themselves on the back for doing the right thing. Frequently today, when DEI is talked about, people think of it in a really narrow way that's focused on HR or operations, but the original concepts behind DEI are so much bigger than that. And leveraged together, they really have the capacity to create a blueprint for the kind of society we're trying to build, one that's really rooted in fairness and justice. And that's exactly why the Trump administration is pushing back so hard against DEI and what they call the woke agenda. Between the executive orders, the attacks on institutions, the blatant misinterpreting of the Constitution, all of that is really designed to consolidate power and control in the hands of white, wealthy men and to strip our communities of our most basic civil rights. So today, during the conversation, we're going to do a deep dive into all of this. And I'm really delighted that we're joined by Kia Sims, who's the Director of Civic Engagement at American Pride Rises, and Jordyn Bussey, the Director of Legislation at American Pride Rises. So the two of them are going to share some recent resources and tools they've developed to defend and protect DEI. They're also going to give us an update on the legislative landscape. And as a group, we'll kind of talk about common DEI myths and share strategies for how we can reclaim the narrative. There is so much that is at stake in this current moment, and our movements can't afford for us to back down from our commitment to racial justice. So we're really hoping that today's session is going to equip you all with some tools and resources that you can take back into your work to keep building the powerful, multifaceted movement that we need to win. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to the stars of the show, Kia and Jordyn.
Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be joining you all today. My colleague Jordyn will be joining us a little bit later in the presentation to really go over some of the legislative landscape that we've been seeing across the country. But really just wanted to start out with our presentation and just define DEI for everyone, right? And so I know there's a lot of definitions of diversity, equity, inclusion around there. There's a lot of definitions of DEI. People approach it differently. But one of the things that we try to do here at American Pride Rises is really make sure that we're all working from a shared definition and operation, right? So that we're all on the same page as we talk about DEI. So, next slide, please. Next one. And so the first one, diversity. When we say diversity, we mean all people. And so you'll notice a lot within our talking points that we really try to, and the way we talk about DEI is like we really try to relate everything back to America. The way, the things that America was founded on, going back to our Constitution, are very DEI coded, as some of my Gen Z staffers like to tell me all of the time. And so we're talking about all people who are endowed with the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So making sure that folks of different abilities, ages, citizenship, classes, neurodiversities, and sexual orientation are all equal. Next slide. And then next is equity. And when we say equity, mean fair access to opportunity. We know equity undoes historical and ongoing systems of inequality and provides just access for success. Equality really lays the foundation for a person to achieve their full potential and for communities to prosper. And the last one. Next one. Inclusion is being a part of the American dream. I'll explain a little bit later about why we tie a lot of our language and messaging into the American dream, but we're really talking about how a person's distinctiveness, background, experience, and perspective is valued as a necessary to the success of a whole, whether that be to the country, to a business, to an organization, etc. We're really talking about valuing folks' experiences in spaces and making sure that folks are able to contribute their talents, knowledges, and hopes. Next slide. So why is DEI important? Next one. So, number one, we always say DEI is not a new movement. It describes over 240 plus years of action that benefits all Americans by delivering equitable opportunities for all. So, here, APR, next slide, we always like to say DEI is in our DNA. And so, you'll see that we kind of lay out all of the instances in which America has kind of been fighting over the last 250 years to become more diverse, to become more inclusive, and to become more equitable. And so we say that literally started out with the American Revolution. And folks kind of look at me crazy when I say that. But when we're talking about the American Revolution, we're talking about folks wanting to be included in the government, in the creation of the laws that they would be governed by because they're tax-paying citizens, right? So America was literally founded off of GI. And ever since then, we've had movements that work to make sure that folks other than white men are also included in those movements. So we have the civil rights movement, we have the labor rights movement, gender rights, voting rights, all disability rights, all movements that were born out of making sure that we could ensure that folks, no matter who they are, what color they were, what their immigration status were, could participate in the opportunities of America. Next slide. And so we say DEI, the second reason why it's important is that DEI removes barriers to the American dream. And I always say, whatever that American dream means to you, there should be pathways that ensure that you are able to have the tools and resources that allow you to reach those dreams, whether it's going to college, being able to afford it, starting a small business, starting a small organization. Like we want to make sure that there are tools and resources in place to be able to start those things. So DEI is hope for the American dream. It widens the pathways to success for all and provides equitable opportunity for communities that are too often left out and left behind. Next slide. And so, why is DEI under attack if it does all of those great things to make sure all of us can ensure that we have access to achieve our dreams? Well, number one, it's working. Would be the main reason, right? So, comprehensive education, full participation in the economy, and a robust democracy are the pathways to success and the American dream. And never before has our nation seen so many people benefiting from this process. And so we know for a fact that folks, DI is working because the research and the polling and everything shows it, right? A majority of workers, about 56%, say that focusing on DEI at work is a good thing. And research has shown that three and four, about 75% of businesses, say that DEI investments have a positive impact on business performance. An enhanced ability to vote, which is another way that we talk about DEI, right? Like people being able to access who's governing them, being able to fully participate in our democracy leads to improved economic status, with critical policies like the Voting Rights Act narrowing the wealth gap in our nation. And the other reason it's under attack is that some people feel threatened by competition and change. There are groups who want to limit access to opportunity, and they're the ones that are attacking the American dream and restricting pathways to success. And it's a cynical and narrow-minded groups who despise equality that want to restore barriers to the American dream, particularly when it comes to education, right? Like they've made it illegal to talk about race and difference in our schools. They've eliminated affirmative action in college admissions, and now they're attacking our military academies, knowing that the first wave of desegregation actually started in the military, right? And Jordyn will talk about this later, but at least 85 bills in 28 states have been introduced to prohibit DEI on college campuses. Next slide. And so we want to talk about too about some of the recent executive orders and headlines and what they really mean. So I'm sure you've seen the slurry of executive orders that have come down from the current administration that really talk about disbanding DEI, saying that DEI is illegal in spaces, but want to just let everyone know executive orders do not change underlying federal law. So while they're meant to make waves, signal political priorities, they don't rewrite the federal laws that govern workplace equity and anti-discrimination. So current laws like Title VII, the Civil Rights Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act remain unchanged, and organizations, companies, etc., still have an obligation to ensure that they are staying compliant with those laws. And so we just want to make sure that we're paying attention to the signals sent by executive orders, but we don't let them guide adjustments to do overhauls in our organizations prior to things becoming fully illegal. Next slide. And so, in fact, employers are still legally required to be fair to all people. Under existing civil rights laws, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, employers are affirmatively required to eliminate practices that create unfair barriers to employment. And we know many employers use DEI initiatives and programs to ensure that they're fulfilling this legal obligation by identifying and addressing discrimination that creates barriers to equal opportunity. Next slide. And so when we're hearing all that, what do we make of all of the kind of recent DEI is dead headlines? And so we want to beware of oversimplified narratives. APR and our sister organizations, which we have a C6 as well, do a lot of talking to folks who work in corporate spaces, who work with like a lot of these large companies. And what we're seeing actually is that DEI isn't necessarily dead, it's evolving, right? And so we saw a wave of organizations, companies, etc., kind of start to implement DEI programs in 2020 in the post George Floyd era. Some people got it right, not everybody did. And so what we're seeing is kind of employers, companies, organizations adjust those practices to actually make them better, to ensure that what they wanted those programs to do are actually what's happening in practice, right? And so we're also seeing political intakes that are like shaping responses. So companies, CEOs, etc., are signaling because they don't want the face of lawsuits or getting attacked by the federal government, are signaling one thing, but we know internally because it is good for business, because it is good for their bottom line, and because their employees overwhelmingly want these programs, they are sticking to and doubling down on their DEI initiatives. And so terminology really matters, but it's not the most important thing. So, in response to scrutiny, some companies are changing and eliminating terms like DEI to deflect attention. Others are standing firm, but whether your program uses familiar terminology, it's not. We all know it's about the effectiveness and legal exposure that you are willing to take. And we care more about the substance and not necessarily about the name. Next slide. So, what does it look like to kind of talk about DEI, to talk about the attacks on DEI, and to kind of just talk to the regular, average, everyday person, which I know a lot of you all work with at your organizations as you're talking about climate justice, etc., in real life. So, I wanted to go through a couple of examples of the way that APR has kind of been using DEI language, DEI messaging to talk to folks in real time, in real life, and to really reach people where they are. So next slide. And so the first one is that we've been leveraging newsworthy moments, right? Like we always say, is all around us. We all live very DEI lives. And so we kind of began to leverage those moments, such as Ford's DEI retreat, events such as Essence Fest, DEI focused legislative field hearings in key states to really message why DEI is vital to the American dream, right? And so our Essence Fest, for example, like we saw for the first time companies back out of being able to fund Essence Fest and like do sponsorships at it, right? And so we're trying to meet people where they are and be like, it's not just about higher education, it's not just about corporate. These rollbacks in DEI are actually affecting things that we looked forward to every summer. Events that we've seen happen over the past 50 years, right, are starting to look very differently because of these rollbacks in DEI. And so really reframing and reshaping how the attacks show up in folks' everyday lives in ways that they wouldn't normally think about it. But also talking about how it makes our workforce stronger, how folks wouldn't have had access to jobs or be able to get in the room for an interview if these programs wouldn't be in place. So really helping folks to relate DEI to what happens to them every day, things that they look forward to every year. Next slide. And so the next way we did it was through digital, really meeting folks where they are and getting creative with how we were discussing DEI. So, of course, we had our DEI dictionary because one of the first things we realized when APR was created, when we did lots of message testing, was that most people actually didn't know what the D, the E, or the I in DEI stood for. And so we did a lot of education at the beginning about defining diversity, equity, and inclusion for people. What does that actually mean? What do those three words even mean as like a baseline? And then we kind of were able to get creative with like how we were talking about it once our folks kind of had a sense of what it actually meant. So we did fun posts like our DEI and Wicked posts when the Wicked movie came out. And we talked to folks about how Wicked is an inherently DEI story. In a way that was like fun and creative and got people to have a conversation about if you can relate to the Wicked movie in real life, these are ways in which like it applies to you in our everyday lives. And so really wanting organizations to get creative with helping folks relate it back to pop culture moments, to things that are already happening, and to not make it feel so stuffy all the time, even though it is serious, but really helping folks to have fun in the ways that we're getting the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion happening. Next slide. And so another thing that we really did was the influencer program. So we focus a lot on getting creators that folks already follow from diverse backgrounds, talking about talking about their stories and how it relates to DEI. So we've had some folks who are on some Bravo shows, like on reality television, talking about like why DEI is important in their space. We've had disability influencers. I think one of my favorite ones, we had an influencer do a white woman's guide to DEI. So like we're really targeting lots of diverse communities and getting folks to talk about how DEI has impacted their ability to achieve their dreams, their ability to share their stories in a way that's relatable to folks, in a way that people can see themselves and how DEI, even if they know it's a DI program or not, has affected them personally. And the post really helped to drive our engagement. 14,000 total engagements across an audience size about 1.4 million people that we were able to reach in a really in a really fun way, but also a way that like they didn't have to come to us. We were showing up on their timelines and meeting them where they were. Next slide. And so we also didn't just want to do digital, but we knew that it was important to be with people in real time, be on the ground, and be in community with folks, especially as attacks heighten. So the first place we did that was through our Defending Our Dreams campaign, which was our higher education program. We encouraged over 5,000 students, faculty, staff, and alumni across all 50 states to call on their elected officials to do their job and defend our dreams. And because we were working with students and faculty, often in states like Michigan, like Georgia, like Virginia, and well, all of them actually, that had seen significant rollbacks in the way that they were allowed to talk about DEI on campus, we took, instead of using full DEI language, we really talked about how attacks on DEI are attacks on student civil rights on campus. And so when we talked about the campaign, we were talking to professors, we were having students talk about it from a perspective of we have lost the ability of our free speech to be able to teach the curriculum that we want to teach in our classrooms. When we're talking to students, we're like, we don't see ourselves reflected in our curriculum anymore. Or I'm no longer to like, we can no longer have a Black student union, an LGBTQ organization on campus, which infringes upon my rights to be able to express who I am, to gather with other like-minded people, etc. So we really framed it in a way, knowing that these attacks on these campuses were already happening, where students were able to still have these conversations on campuses with their professors, from a civil rights framework. That was very difficult to attack, right? Because no one wants to say that they were anti-civil rights. And so really kind of taking our same messaging and talking points, but changing the language a little bit to be able to fit the audience so our students, our faculty, our staff were able to continue to have these conversations. Next steps. Let me slide. And so this summer, we actually just wrapped up our Summer of Us campaign, which was meant to engage and equip and activate folks from all over the country. And so we basically took the cultural moments that already happened over the summer. So Disability Pride Month, Juneteenth, um, Pride Month, and really just kind of went into communities who were already having these cultural celebrations and talking about how attacks on DEI are attacks on our ability to like continue to celebrate Pride Month or Disability Pride Month or Juneteenth. Like we already saw a lot of those things pulled off of federal government websites. They're no longer, or like days recognized, like companies were no longer allowed to post that they were doing anything for these events on their websites. So talking about the effects that that have on different communities, on folks' ability to show up at work, when it was something that it was your company had done for 50 plus years or whoever knows how long, and now you're not able to show up in that way at work. And so we went into communities and we hosted 2 events normally. Sometimes it was a town hall where we worked with state legislators and community organizations for folks to be able to put on the record how scared they were with attacks on DEI as it related to either immigration or LGBTQ rights or whatever it may be, and to really help folks kind of begin to have those conversations and tell those stories. And sometimes it was us showing up at something like the Minnesota State Fair, which is attended by millions of people. And we got to pop up and activate and like get folks to write postcards to their state legislators about why they wanted to support DEI. Because another thing we found is that sometimes like we're having these conversations in a vacuum, but and we needed to get more people saying out loud that they supported DEI and letting elected officials know, letting local community leaders know that it was a topic that folks are interested in. And so our Summer of Us campaign was meant to be joyful and celebrate those all things while also moving folks into action to ensure that our elected officials, leaders were hearing from folks about this. Next slide. And so with that, I will turn it over to my colleague Jordyn to kind of go over the legislative landscape that we're seeing.
Yes, thank you, Kia. So part of American Pride Rises, a big bucket of our work is to track DEI related legislation in the states, as well as to engage in strategies and resources to engage in the policymaking process to either push back against bad policies and to promote and put forward proactive policies. So you'll see at the link here on this slide, that's a link to our live DEI related legislation tracker that is updated on a couple times a week. And so you can go through there and track, and you can search through issue categories. ESG is included in there, as well as DEI. You can search by state. You can search by policies that have passed or implemented versus ones just introduced. So that's a really helpful resource that's always updated. And I'm very sorry, I have a toddler in the background, so please bear with me. So next slide. So what I'm going to go over here is just trends from DEI related legislation that has moved throughout 2025. One thing I will say, just to put all of this in context, is as you all know, being the majority of you being like state advocates and state or locally engaged, is these attacks have been coming for years. You can stay on this. You can stay on the first slide. Yeah, thank you. So these attacks have been building at the state level long before, the Trump administration came in January and put out their executive orders around DEI. So it takes time to build that momentum. So I just put this into context. When I share some of these numbers, some of them are really great and some of them are a little scary, but that's also because the anti-DEI side had been putting work in for multiple years to get to the enactment rates that we're seeing now on anti-DEI legislation. So we're engaging now to really counter that and be that proactive kind of that other proactive side of this. So just on sheer number, DEI related legislation has boomed and increased at 31% from 2024 to 2025. It was already a huge number, but we had over 676 DEI related bills introduced in all 50 states in 2025. You'll see here in the map that you see, the color gradient just shows the darker the purple means the more bills that were introduced related to DEI. 238 anti-DEI bills moved in the states, and 29 of those bills were actually enacted in 20 states this year. That 29 bill is strong because I'll show you in another slide, the rate of how many of those bills are being enacted is increasing over the last couple years. And then on the flip side, actually more bills supportive of DEI were introduced over this last year. We just don't have the same enactment rates. But again, to what I was saying at the top, those, it takes time to build the momentum for that. So that's why the messaging that Kia is talking about is so important, because you need to get that messaging to really filter in and permeate within communities so that we can gain the momentum to pass those kinds of proactive bills. There were 4 states that vetoed anti-DEI bills, which were huge wins this year in Arizona, North Carolina, Kentucky, and Wyoming. And so those were some great highlights. States with the most pro-DEI bills were New York, Illinois, Massachusetts, Texas, and California. I think the thing to note that we learned that needs to kind of work there is to get higher enactment rates. In some of those super blue states, we actually need less bills introduced and more coordination and collective effort by legislators to move forward the same bills instead of to introduce like 8 different bills related to DEI and not move them together. So that's what we're working on with legislators kind of right now and the legislators that we've been talking to. States with the most anti-DEI bills, unsurprisingly, Texas, Louisiana, Missouri, Florida, Montana, and South Carolina. Next slide. So some trends to see in pro-DEI bills that have been moving is establishing government positions and offices, mandating language access, inclusive healthcare expansion, and anti-discrimination policies. On the flip side, some trends in the anti-DEI bills that have been moving are prohibiting public funds for DEI, eliminating programs and offices, banning diversity statements, restricting DEI in hiring and admissions, and banning like divisive DEI aligned instruction. So a lot of that comes to not just curriculum within K-12 as well as higher ed, but also just like instruction within job spaces and employment. One other thing I will note that I don't have on the slide is we've seen an uptick in anti-DEI bills that specifically target local governments and municipalities, and that's a big reason for that. We're seeing is because that's where a lot of local governments and municipalities, to be proactive, we're passing some really good protections for DEI. And so that's the state's responses to actually peel back some of that progress that has been made. So that's something we're monitoring really closely. Next slide. So again, as I was saying I referenced earlier, just showing the trend in and how we're seeing the rise in the actual anti-DEI bills being enacted in the states. You can see that, you know, we've had some back and forth where you see the pendulum move, but we're definitely on an upswing of further enactment of these bills. And so doing a lot of tracking on what that implementation looks like and the impact of that. As well as, so sorry everyone, as well as well as then working, we've been coordinating a lot with litigating organizations on how they can bring forth some cases to push back on these enacted bills. Next slide, please. Okay, and then just a quick legal analysis of some of these bills. All of the 29 bills enacted in those 20 states, from our legal analysis, they potentially violate some sort of core civil rights protections. This goes back to the DEI is in our DNA that Kia flagged before for some of these really historic, essential civil rights bills that we have, codified into law. All of those bills potentially have, a case to be made that violates some of these key, these key things like the First Amendment. All 29 bills, there could be cases that it violates the First Amendment. The Americans with Disabilities Act, 21 of the 29 bills, you could make the case that they violate that. 23 of the enacted laws potentially violate Title VI. 24 potentially violate the 14th Amendment. And so on. And so I think, again, that coordination, not just letting things go after policies are passed, but finding ways to engage and push back even after we've lost at that legislative level. There's still opportunities to kind of win back and bounce back from those losses. Next slide. So part of APR's solution to that and some of the resources we provide and develop is we have been developing model legislation for pro-DEI language, and have been working with organizational partners on the ground as well as legislators. We've worked with some AGs in states to push forward pro-DEI proactive legislation. So we have, if you go to the next slide, we currently have model bills around data collection and reporting, healthcare, and government agency and public institutions. And we've got guides for legislators on all of those. So if you're interested in more information on them, or you have policymakers who you'd be interested in, I will put my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out and I can share those with you directly. For 2026 legislative sessions, we are in the process of developing additional model policy around housing, education, and AI. And so you go to the next slide. So it's not just those model bills, but we also want to support legislators and advocates like yourselves on the ground who want to engage in the policymaking process. So for all of those issues, we have guidance notes and policy briefs on that folks can use to both analyze policy as well as to make recommendations for policy. We have messaging and talking points on these policy issues, and we provide direct support to legislators and other policymakers with like testimony, helping them draft testimony, letters for the record, questions during hearings, help them with sample statements. And so those are just thank you to folks in the chat. And so those are some of the ways we're trying to stay engaged and proactive in the states to really push these things forward. Next slide. Okay, I'll turn it back to Kia, but thank you all for the work you do. And again, feel free to reach out if you have specific policy-related questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Jordyn, and hi, Miles. So if I hope y'all listen to lots of this presentation, but if you take nothing else, we just want to make sure that folks are championing DEI. So we want folks to speak up, communicate the value of DEI, why it matters. I always say we all have very DEI stories and very DEI lives. So as much as we can share our own personal stories, the stories of our organizations and the work they're doing and how they help folks achieve their dreams, the better. And share successes from the historic movements that have moved our nation forward to the ways communities, companies, and our economy has improved because of expanded access. We have to highlight those success stories and how DEI benefits our economy and our nation. And finally, stand firm. It's like we've talked about. DEI is not a collection of recent policies that can be reversed without consequence. If we lose DEI from education, the economy, and elections, it undermines the promise of America and our winning edge as a nation. Next slide. And so, of course, we will make sure that like the folks have these for any wrap-up emails that they're sending along with the PowerPoints. But we just wanted to make sure we left y'all with some resources or just an overview of the resources that APR has to offer. The first one being our American Pride Rises Know Your Rights Toolkit. And so it has a series of decision trees, messaging guidance, and more tools to guide you every day. It's especially curated for small to medium-sized organizations to really help them navigate this anti-DEI moment, what they can and cannot do, what does it look like if I get like threatened with like legal action, etc. That toolkit is under password protection. So I will drop it, the password and link in the chat, and also make sure that it gets sent out after the call for y'all. But want to make sure that y'all have the resource. We work very closely with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, if you have specific legal questions about your organization that like aren't generic or like want someone to come through your website, they are an excellent partner. They love, like I promise, they love for folks to come and ask them questions and to be able to get the support for them. And they're all able to offer some pro bono legal guidance to organizations. I will say that our Know Your Rights toolkit and guide is about 100 something pages. I have read it all. I don't expect everyone to read it all. So we developed Adiva, which is our APR chatbot. It lives on our website at aprnetwork.org. It feeds and pulls from APR's website and trusted resources. So if you have specific questions, if you're like, I want some talking points to talk about DI for this thing I'm doing, or like I want to know how to relate, it's really good about generating talking points around like education, small businesses, organizations. We have some really niche ones on how like DI values are Jewish values that like we worked with some of our Jewish organizations on. And so are always looking to collaborate with more organizations if they're like very niche topics that y'all think we should do some DI messaging around. We love doing that with folks to make sure we're like reaching communities. The next one is our 10 Steps campaign. Our organization is founded by leader Stacey Abrams. And so we are one of the organizations that is really helping to promote the 10 Steps campaign, which launched a week or two ago, which is a national mobilization and education campaign to give Americans the framework to understand what's happening to our democracy and also give them the tools and resources to fight back. So you might have seen her viral video where she's talking about how step 7 and the steps to authoritarianism is like attacks on marginalized community, which obviously is what APR is working on, which is attacks to DEI. But also, we know that different organizations fall under different areas of those steps. And so we want to make sure that organizations are able to talk about that and talk about how their work inherently is helping to fight authoritarianism and save democracy in this moment. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have our C6, which is the Freedom Economy Business Association, which really works with corporations, but folks who sit on boards in particular. So they're an organization. I always call them a chamber of commerce for DEI. It's like the way I explain them to people. That has great resources for corporations, folks in businesses, folks in the business world, etc., to be able to talk about DEI. But we have a whole swarm of resources and guides and messaging and toolkits that you can access at aprnetwork.org/resources that we want to make sure y'all have and use and you have in your hands. And so that is the end of our presentation. And with that, wanted to open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Kia and Jordyn. Let's give them, I know folks have been giving them love in the chat, but put on your emojis, send your love into the chat. That was so much helpful content and information. And also, Jordyn, I'm incredibly impressed at your ability to lead a presentation like that while navigating being in a car with a small child. So thank you so much. All right, so I'm going to move us into some of the questions we got from folks with our last 15 minutes here. So there was a question in the chat around kind of asking why APR leans into defining diversity, equity, and inclusion, but not the American dream. And so maybe as a part of that, if you all do have a shared definition that you use, if you could share that with us.
So no, we don't have a shared definition of the American dream on purpose because I don't think there is or should be one. I think part of the way that we want folks to approach is like, okay, we're gonna give you the definition. This is what DI means, but we want you to take it and talk about how your personal story fits into that definition of DI. So we love our working moms. So like, oh, we love our Jordans of the world. And if your definition of the American dream fits into that, we want you to be able to see yourself in it. But we also want folks who's like, I don't want kids actually. Like I want to be some like the cool rich auntie. Like we want that person to be able to see themselves in like APR is like in talking points and like diversity as well. And so we really make it a point whether no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, no matter what your identity is, we give you the definition and like whatever your dream is, we'll help you talk about the pathways to reaching that and how DEI affects those pathways, making sure that those resources are protected. But we never want to tell people like you need to have 2.5 kids and like a picket fence because we know that like that's not the standard anymore. And like as part of DEI, like we want to make sure that like folks' values and perspectives in that are coming to the conversation.
That's beautiful. Thanks, Kia. That's really helpful. Wonderful. So you all talked about this a bit in your presentation, but someone in the chat is elevating how much it matters to be defending or doubling down on the term DEI versus the ideas that the acronym represents. So if you have any additional insights that you want to share around that, that would be great.
Yeah, really helpful that we were talking to the Know Your Rights Guide authors this morning and I was like doing a retraining with them. So basically, obviously, we love as many people as possible to be using DEI. We love as many people as possible to be doubling down on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We also understand the current political climate that we're in and that it is more important for folks to be able to have the substance, to have their funding, to do the work than it is necessarily say the language. So I always tell folks you have to assess your legal risk as an organization to be able to decide what it is that you do and do not want to do. So for my smaller to medium-sized organizations, maybe it's not possible for you depending on the state that you're in, depending on the conversations that you're having with funders. You might have to talk about it differently. It might have to look differently on paper. We understand that. And so at the end of the day, we want organizations to continue to do the work for the communities that they are doing. That is the most important thing. I will say on the flip side, I tell my larger organizations, the organizations that are in like stable financial positions and can like assume the legal risk, it is your job to continue to say DEI. It is your job to continue to say diversity, equity, and inclusion and stand up for the organizations that may not be in the same legal or financial in like situation as you are. And so the Know Your Rights Guide, I'm going to go back to it again, is like really helpful at like helping organizations to kind of understand where they kind of fall on with that legal risk, what steps they can take on their websites, what language they should be using, etc. But I really think it just depends on like how much risk you can assume as an organization.
Yeah, and I would just add in on like the legislative side to that. Like again, like with our model policy, the that language is really clear, but again, it's model policy. So a great example of that, we worked with legislators in Nevada this last year, and they really wanted to move something forward, and they saw an opportunity to have a bipartisan bill that supported all of these things. And so they pulled out equity specific language, but focused on civil rights specific language. And that bill was able to pass with bipartisan support during like this time. So again, like as Kia said, like we're going to keep putting that forward, but the impact for people is again like the most important thing. And so if there's opportunities within that, I think it's just about being smart and savvy in this like the space and the systems that you're in. And so there's still opportunities to make that impact. If and you just have to know your spaces, right?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you both for that. And thanks for that helpful reminder, Jordyn. This next question is about legislation, and just a curiosity from someone around how Texas has both the most pro and the most anti-DEI bills, and just any thoughts you have that you might want to share around that, Jordyn.
Yeah, I think Texas is a great example of legislators really putting their political futures like on the line and standing firm on the issues that matter to their communities, right? So while they're still battling the most like anti-DEI bills, they're still they're not just pushing back against those, but they're putting on the line of what the values that they need to see and what their constituents need and what like the policies should look like. For me, when I've been looking at this work the last couple of years, I talk a lot about incremental wins and getting like the language that you want, the policy that you want on the record and building that record and creating the spaces for folks to come and testify and share their stories. So while you may not get it passed, building that record, and it takes a few years sometimes to get meaningful legislation passed. And that's why, again, we're seeing these higher inaction rates of anti-DEI bills, this because those folks have been at it for 4 years, and so like if we stay patient and have, policymakers who are really willing to put it on the line and still put forward what's needed, I think that we just have to be patient and persevere to like keep pushing those wins. And so that Texas is a perfect example of folks both being, pushing back and still trying to be proactive. And so that's what we're trying to work with legislators in lots of states to do.
Amazing. Thanks for that, Jordyn. All right. So there was another question around practical messaging strategies we can use to reframe DEI as essential to effective climate solutions. So it sounds like your team works with folks like across different issue areas, but any kind of thoughts you have around how to tailor some of your messaging based on a particular focus area would be great.
Yeah, one of the reasons I was excited to get on this call is because like we hadn't got to work with some climate groups in particular about framing some of these messaging. So if it's something that folks are interested in, it's something that we are interested in developing, we'd love for you to reach out to us so we can develop those guides for our climate justice organizations, for our environmental organizations, because it's an inherently DEI conversation. Like we know that on the surface. Like I used to live in Louisiana. I have friends from Cancer Alley. My dad got cancer because he was like living minutes from a facility that was like cleaning medical tools and like put it all in the air in like a majority Black community. So like we understand how inherently DEI these conversations are, but would love, and I'll drop my email in the chat too, for folks to reach out if that's something that you're interested in developing that we can help push out as just another lens and way to get people talking about this issue and thinking about it in a different way. I would say I can connect DEI to literally anything, like literally anything. But like some of our larger issues, of course, we want to make sure we're getting out into the ether.
Amazing. Thank you so much. All right, I'm cognizant of time, so I'm gonna try to squeeze two more questions in, and then we'll just do a very brief wrap up. Curious your thoughts on, I think this is kind of like, there's two separate questions, and I'm gonna just try to combine them in real time, so bear with me, everyone. But thinking about in this work, how we kind of tailor approaches based on the audience or the segment, and then also like with the end goal in mind of how are we actually kind of reaching into getting the folks that are more in the movable middle to our side versus trying to focus on like one of the polarized ends.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we kind of did early on in like the conception of APR is like we tested the messaging on so many organizations. We put it out in the field to like see what was and was not resonating with real people. And so the three areas that we focus on and kind of help to like try to tailor when we're like talking to anyone across the spectrum on why they should care about DEI boils down to the three E's. So like we're talking about education, elections, and the economy. So like any time that we can reach people within one of those three areas and like tailor kind of their interests in those three ways, we overwhelmingly see that like people get on board, right? And because everyone wants their kid to be able to go to college or have, even if they don't want to, have the ability. But also sometimes it's like, okay, some people just care about their kid being able to get in and like go somewhere. But then we're like diving deeper, like, can they afford housing? Can they afford their textbooks? Do they feel safe on campus? Like we can have more in-depth conversations depending on the person. Same thing with elections, like making sure folks have access to the ballot to be able to have the folks in power that represent them, that represent their issues, etc. And then the economy, which probably overwhelmingly works with literally anybody you talk to ever. Just making sure that sometimes it's folks like wanting to have access to a social safety net, right? Is the conversation we're having with them. Sometimes it's people that want access to be able to start a small business. We're seeing attacks on small business loans that go towards women, that are meant for veterans, that are meant for folks with disabilities. Like we're seeing attacks on these things. And so we want to make sure we're having the conversations with those folks about how it affects them. And then also just like having conversations about people are like, how does the tax on DEI affect for like my ability to like be able to afford groceries, which like honestly goes back into like elections, education, the economy, right? And so I think that plus you all talk to folks in your organizations every day on a regular basis, and you know the things that your community members kind of are caring about, have a pulse on, etc. And so how do you take those issues to relate them back to access to DEI, why DEI is important, etc., as a way to start the conversation from a place that they already know, care, and understand? Um, and then talking about it from your purview. So we always say you don't have to take every single thing that APR says and like copy paste. Like we want organizations to really tailor it to the communities that they speak to be able to talk about their issue in a way that relates to DEI, to kind of help spread that message. And so my team's always laughing at me. They're like, you never talk to the same person the same way twice. And I'm like, correct. Because like every time I'm talking about DEI, like my perspective, the things that I'm like kind of focusing more or less on are really tailored to like where that person is coming from, either politically, educationally, etc. So
Amazing. Thank you both so much. Um, I feel like we could spend a lot longer continuing to ask questions, but I want to be respectful of people's time. Before I move us into like next steps and a quick closing, Kia and Jordyn, I just wanted to give you space if there's anything else you want to share to folks.
nothing, but I will say Jordyn and I, when we say reach out to us, email us, like we want to hear from folks, like we actually do mean that. Like we really love partnerships, especially with our folks who work state specific, county specific, city specific. Like those are the organizations that we want to partner with because those are organizations that are most vulnerable right now. And so we love to sit on more of these. Like we have other folks at the org who are happy to sit, join webinars, join panels. We travel when it makes sense. So like please do reach out to us for anything y'all might need in other places where it makes sense for us to partner. Like we mostly exist to be a resource to y'all. So
Well, thank you both so much for your time today. We're so appreciative, so grateful. I'm very excited. We'll share all of these resources out with folks after the call, so you can expect an email from us soon. And just to flag for folks, the Leading with Race and Climate Solutions team is going to be hosting a convening in October with a small group of leaders to really think about how do we develop and share strategies across our networks that allow us to deepen organizing in order to center racial justice in the climate fight. And so there will be, I'm assuming, a lot of incredible stuff that emerges from that convening. So we're excited to share some of that back out with folks once we're ready. We are also planning an upcoming webinar, likely in November, to start a conversation around long-term strategy, right? And how do we start thinking about getting folks aligned and moving in the same direction, recognizing that the right has a multi-decade strategy that they've been rolling out really effectively, and we need to be able to combat that with our own vision for what the future and justice looks like in our communities. Also want to encourage folks, if you have time, to fill out the feedback form for today's session. It's really helpful for us in terms of figuring out where we go from here, figuring out what's helpful for people in terms of format of these kinds of conversations. And so someone from the project team should be dropping a link to the form in the chat. And also encourage you to sign up to keep in touch with us on our project website. Like Kia and Jordyn said, our team also loves to be in touch with folks. We started this project because we wanted to be able to help support people in navigating the challenging political and legal climate we're in. And so we're always happy to hear from folks.